All right, thanks for joining us. We are back. This is part 3 of a 3-part series. If you missed our first 2 webinars, we covered baselining your team, how to baseline, the importance of it. So we had a whole section on that. And then we also covered, in our second piece, we covered courses. What types of courses are out there? Which courses work best for ultimately getting your team to stay engaged? And what we're doing today, and I'm joined here by solutions consultant, sorry, Kieran, solutions consultant Kieran Witter, and then a member of our CSM team, Brandon Henry. We're talking about reporting today. And I think we've talked about this as validating skills, but this is really about reporting and understanding the results when you're using a skills intelligence platform, and what the results can tell you, and the types of insights that you should be looking for to understand, are you getting value out of a skills intelligence platform? How do you see the results? How are even customers that we have, how do they think about the results that they see on the other side, looking at a dashboard, looking at a report, and so on. And so there's kind of 3 areas that we'll cover today. So the first is accountability. So ultimately, how to go from saying we've purchased training, we've assigned training. Now, how do we make sure that people are actually doing it? So accountability is a big piece of this, of course. Consumption, which again kind of falls in the same category as accountability, but consumption in our industry in this space is probably one of the most misunderstood ideas, where it's important that people are consuming content. That's really not the whole story. So we'll dig into that. And then finally, we'll talk about how customized content. We talked about this in our last one. We talked about labs, hands-on labs, lab playgrounds, environments that look and feel just like production environments, but places where people can practice. How that actually is one of the best ways to drive the results. And once you see the outcome on the other side, through the report, through a dashboard, that's when you know that folks are really ready to take on that big next project, or whether it's go multi-cloud, cloud migration, whatever it may be. And so the first piece here, let's talk accountability. So how do you understand whether or not you're getting folks into the right swim lane to take a set of courses, to take a learning path? How do you make sure that they do these things? And so Brandon, let me toss it to you first. As far as making sure people do the training, there are tools that can help with this. How do you think about accountability as it relates to courses and keeping people on track?
Yeah, good question, Benny. Thank you. So the tool, the Cloud Academy tool, we have centralized control over the training that would be assigned to each user. So we could assign each user into groups based on their role or based on their skill objectives, more importantly, their skill objectives. So if we have a bunch of users that we want to get upskilled on AWS, from the baseline assessment, we understand, okay, this group should start at AWS Fundamentals or AWS Solutions Architect Associate. We have our training plan tool where we can actually assign one of the learning paths. The learning path is simply just a collection of courses, quizzes, and exams, all designed to upskill in one area. And we'll assign that in the form of a training plan, set a weekly commitment, whether that's, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours a week, and then we'll assign that out to the team. Now that tool, once that's assigned, is going to track that user's progress. We'll see how far along they came on their training plan. And if they ever fall behind, we'll actually have some automatic nudges that will go out to those users to serve as a reminder. And also there is another tool there along with the training plan that you can actually add a training reminder to your calendar to help keep you accountable, and some additional notifications that'll come directly from your Google or Outlook calendar.
Yeah, that's awesome. And honestly, I forget to do things around the house all the time. And honestly, if I put them in my calendar, I actually remember. And I'd say every time I talk with my wife and she's like, we have to do X, Y, and Z, she almost always then follows with, can you also put it in your calendar? Because she knows that that's how I remember to do things. But to be fair, training is, it's life doesn't always allow you to do something for 30 minutes a day, every day at the same time. Things come up, whether it's, your dog barking or whatever it may be. And so having kind of a structure, a system built in, that's not just saying, well, the courses are there, the content is there, you should be doing it. having those accountability tools on the backside of things, I think it's a really important part of a platform that, again, is about learning, and it's about keeping people on track. I think in the big picture. Kieran, from your perspective, again, I know you're in the solution consulting world, but how do you think about accountability as it relates to keeping folks on track?
Yeah, similar to Brendan, really. It's very much thinking about from an end user perspective, at least, if I'm going off and I'm doing training, if I know every Wednesday lunchtime I've got 30 minutes or an hour, then I'm exactly like you, Benny. I'd love to block time out of my calendar, because then I know I'm actually going to hold myself accountable for my own learning and make sure I get something complete. If I've got a blank spot, I might go off and pick up emails or do other things. Whereas if I've got that actually in my calendar, I know that I'm going to go off and actually achieve that. From a management perspective, though, it's really good for managers to be able to go in and assign that particular training. Not only giving the weekly commitment, like Brendan was saying, but if we look at certifications as an example, if an organization needs to know by the end of maybe October this year, they've got to get 5 of their staff members certified, they can go in and actually set that as an end date. So, and that will then automatically create that sort of their weekly commitments, and that therefore they know they're going to stay on track towards that particular goal of achieving that particular certification by that particular due date.
Yeah, makes sense. And so moving into consumption, and I think I kind of teed this up earlier. I think in the e-learning space in general, right, whether it's skills intelligence or any platform that provides training courses, consumption is it's a true false statement, right? Is the content being consumed or not? And if the answer is no, then that's a problem, right? That there's an issue there. That's where the accountability piece comes in. But even if there is consumption, I really don't think that that's the whole story. I think looking at number of hours that folks have consumed content doesn't necessarily tell you if somebody knows a subject or has developed. And this is true when you're in school as well. It doesn't matter how many hours you spend studying for the test. I mean, if you're not really focusing, you're not studying the right concepts, or you're not using things in a certain way to help you, you may not in fact do as well on the test, even though you said, well, I spent 10 hours studying, right? Some people study for less time and achieve better results. And so, I'll flip it back to you, Kieran. How, like, in kind of the world of like skill insights, right? How can you go from saying, well, how many course hours have they consumed, to understanding a different way to say, have they learned something? Have they developed these skills? How do you typically think about that?
Yeah, so exactly as you say, Benny, time spent actually watching content, listening to content, whatever it is, reading something, doesn't necessarily translate into, learning those skills. For me, I'm very much a learn by doing sort of person. So I'll have an attention span, maybe 20, 30 minutes, if that, when I'm watching or listening to something. And then my mind will just go elsewhere. You focus on other things, and that's fine. So for me, I love to actually get stuck in, and I can listen to things, but I actually want to get stuck in and learning by doing. So Cloud Academy has hands-on labs, and I very much like going into a real-world environment and actually being able to learn by doing. So let's take cloud as an example. If I'm using AWS and I want to fire up a virtual machine on AWS or Azure or whatever it is that I'm using, I can come into Cloud Academy and I can actually sort of apply that knowledge which I have. And then just flipping back to what you were saying before about sort of also time spent. Conversely, if you spend too much time, so if you're actually spending loads of time doing lots of mock exams and spending lots of time preparing for a certification, sometimes you can over prepare as well. So what you might end up doing is you might end up learning the answers to the mock exams, which isn't the best way of learning, because you're just over preparing and then you're just waiting for those questions to come up. So that's not a good way of learning either. And that's why it's very much a good way to make sure you're learning by doing, but you're also preparing yourself for exams by taking lots of different certification questions. And that's why in Cloud Academy, we have a really large question set, so people can't just learn the questions over and over again to prepare themselves for that certification.
Yeah, it reminds me of the child learns like the Nile is the longest river in Egypt, and that they learn that over and over and over again, but eventually they can't actually answer the question. They just keep repeating the statement. So like you're saying, it's there's a little bit of a give and take. Just memorizing the answers doesn't necessarily mean you know something. And so I think having a broad set of questions, I think, is key. And we'll come back to the customized content. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do think that that's a huge component of actual skill growth versus just saying hours consumed. From a customer perspective, Brandon, how have you seen, the world of consumption, get shifted towards consumption matters to us, but on the other hand, that's really not what we're after. So talk about maybe a customer that you've known that, again, looks beyond consumption, if you will.
Yeah. I actually see the consumption KPI being less and less important to customers as time goes on, especially once they get embedded into our Cloud Academy methodologies. Really, what they want to understand, they want to be able to quantify their users' theoretical and their practical understanding of the material in order to, to place them for projects, understand, who is, who could head up a project, who could, train some new hires or have some new hires shadow them while this person works, or even from a recognition standpoint, they might be aware that, these users have, really high skills but their bandwidth usually is, they usually don't have the most bandwidth. So then we can start looking down the third or fourth person on that leaderboard, and they're the ones that actually are putting in the work and completing tasks in the platform. So the way that I see this changing is that we'll go out, we'll do a baseline assessment, we'll understand all the skills by platform, by domains, by subdomains, and then ultimately what we're doing is we're assigning tasks in the platform. Like Kieran was saying, labs, exams, anything that actually proves that these users understand the material. And then over time, we're actually accurately able to measure how much their skills have grown and then reward those users with the highest skill profiles by, assigning them to our projects or, recognizing some of the users that, necessarily didn't have that much of a big workload before. So it's certainly become more important over time.
Brandon, I just wanted to touch on that bit in terms of reward. I think that's really good from an individual perspective, because one, it means that they are going to be able to enhance their own career development by understanding where their skill sets are now, but also where they need to get in order to be, to get that promotion or whatever it is that they're specifically going after. But also from a management perspective, it's also really good to see, you mentioned that leaderboard of seeing the sort of top users, not only to see what can we do in terms of putting people on projects, which is fantastic, but also see where any weaknesses might be within the team or within individual users. So then when it comes to that appraisal process in 6 months, 12 months time, they can actually go in and have a look at how can we actually improve that particular skill set. And then again, it links back to that accountability state of how can we do that? Let's assign training plans and make sure people are going to stay on track. And then in 6, 12 months time, they're going to become an expert in that particular field. And then that should help them work towards their own career progression as well.
Certainly, it certainly helps with micro learning too, where you don't have to throw an entire learning path at an individual, knowing that, this user just actually really needs to be strong in storage or databases or compute, for example. So instead of spending, 12 hours towards learning, they could spend 4 hours towards learning and still accomplish the same goals.
I agree.
Makes sense. I like that, micro learning. And so we've talked about it, Kieran, you talked about it. I said something about it, of course. Brandon, this even came up with you as well. And we covered this in a lot more detail on our last webinar where we talked about different types of courses. But, the value of customized content, I think, we can all kind of sit here in agreement and say, if you're working in an environment, if you are practicing in an environment that looks and feels like the real thing, and you are doing tasks that emulate real tasks that you would do in a production environment, this is really the best way to learn. And, moving off of consumption, the best way to actually learn something and be effective when, the time calls for it. And so, Brendan, I want to kick this to you because I know that, here at Cloud Academy, again, full ability to customize content, but my question really is, where do you see customized content, or give me an example of a customer where, they're using customized content and then they're actually seeing whether it's, in the project that they're executing on, or even just, kind of the skill growth, they're seeing how drastic the results are and how effective folks now are because of using training that's hands-on, not just training that's, sitting here watching a video or doing a quiz or reading, a textbook, if you will.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that, first of all, our labs are great. We have a lab for almost any situation, any service that the customer can run into. But what we're starting to see is more of a demand for experiential learning, where the labs, our customers want the labs to mirror their current tech stack. So we'll have customers that approach us, and really what they want to do is just take advantage of our lab environment. They'll work with our product team. They'll also work with our content team so we can understand their tech stack a little bit more and get really detailed about it. And then we'll go into our content engine, create a customized lab that, will highlight the same services. We'll call out the files that are similar to the customer's files, or however, their tech stack is configured, customize that in Content Engine, and then actually create, a small learning path of just labs, assign that to the users, and they're so much more productive in their production environments. It really gives the admins or the managers a peace of mind too, where they get to practice being in their production environment, but by using a Cloud Academy subscription, they could test it out in our lab environments, then go to their test environment, and then production environment. So we're like, two or three steps away from ever getting close to production. But by the time they get there, they really have that peace of mind that this person knows exactly what they're doing, and less mistakes are made.
Yeah, and something you said there that I think is really important with this kind of thing, which is it's really a team effort, right? Making a customized lab, making something mirror your tech stack, right? It's not just born immediately with a skills intelligence platform of any kind, really. These are collaborative efforts, and I know that we work closely with our customers to develop these, but at the end of the day, it's a team effort to make sure that it really does give somebody a true taste of, even if it's just the testing environment, not necessarily the production. It's really a collaborative effort. And I think what we find is, the closer that we do work with our content team, our product team, to help our customers get there, I know that we found that, that's the best way to get labs in that, are truly effective and again, are interesting and useful too, from the end user perspective. Kieran, anything to add on this front?
No, I think the ability to customize content is just really key to, exactly as Brendan was saying, make it relevant to customers, right? So it's all well and good having something that's generic, and that can work in a lot of scenarios, but being able for people to go in there and make it specific to their own environment, to mirror their tech stack, exactly as Brendan was saying, I think that's just really valuable. Not only that, but people can go in and adjust instructions, so they don't even have to go in and change the lab in any way. But if they want to adjust instructions and say, this is how we do it in our team, or maybe they go in and put other screenshots as well, so how things look slightly different in their team, that can be really valuable as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that, even after they create that customized lab, they can actually build another validation step there with like a short quiz or, exam, nothing, to like confuse the end user, but just to make sure that they went through the lab. And then we could actually tie specific skills to these labs. And then we could actually, those skills will be reflected in our skill profile reporting to see how much the skills have grown even after taking the custom lab.
Yeah, makes sense. It's helpful. And so, in future iterations and future conversations, I don't know if we'll be joined by Brandon and Kieran here, but we'll certainly revisit the idea of customized content, because I know for us and really in the state of the industry as well, it's really been a game changer for learning and for learners, right, and managers alike. So we'll continue to touch on that. Again, we covered baseline, we covered types of courses, and today we touched on a lot of the reporting piece and how to look at skill growth and our good old friend consumption and how to not prioritize that, of course. In the future, we will cover other subjects. So we'll talk about LMS integration. We'll talk about, again, customized content. We'll have a whole segment on that. And we'll cover a number of other kind of use case topics, because I think there's a lot of different ways to think about skills intelligence platforms and, again, how to make sure that you're getting the most out of them. So with that said, glad you were able to join us again. No dog interruptions this time, but I'm Benny Bridger, joined with Brandon and Kieran, and thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Benny.
Thank you.